Before we dive into the issue of the investigative judgment and the date of 1844, one must know the context of this idea and how it came into fruition. Answering Adventism clearly maps out the historical formation of this idea. In response to the Great Disappointment in 1844, which was a failed prophecy about the second coming of Christ, which was predicted to happen in October 22nd, 1844, some Millerites refused to accept that they were wrong. This band became known as the Little Flock, who eventually incorporated in 1863 as the Seventh-day Adventists. Ellen White allegedly received a vision regarding the Little Flock and what actually happened in 1844, which supposedly confirmed what other individuals had theorized and speculated, that in 1844, Jesus wasn't returning to the earth, but moving from the holy place to the most holy place of a sanctuary building in heaven, and this was to begin his second phase of atonement ministry. Or in other words, 1844 was the date in which Jesus entered from the holy place to the most holy place in heaven. Disregarding other theological assumptions, such as if there's a physical temple in heaven analogous to the Old Testament temple, the idea that in 1844 Jesus entered into the most holy place in heaven is simply refuted by Hebrews 6:19-20, which reads, "This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which enters the presence behind the veil, where the forerunner has entered for us, even Jesus having become high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." If one was not able to pick out and understand the significance of the language in Hebrews, the text clearly states that Jesus already entered the presence behind the veil. Every instance of behind the veil is representative of the veil in front of the most holy place. Hebrews indicates that Jesus entered into the presence before the veil, which means that Jesus already entered the most holy place prior to 1844. The Greek of the main verb in verse 20 makes this point abundantly clear. It is in the aorist indicative with an augment, which is an indicator that this event has definitely occurred, i.e. a historical fact. For Adventists to keep their interpretation of Jesus entering the most holy place in 1844, Hebrews would have to be written after 1844 in order for the definite verb entered to apply. Or in simple terms, Jesus cannot enter the most holy place until 1844, but the Greek implies that he has entered the most holy place indefinitely before 1844. Therefore, the passage must be written after 1844 in order for the entering in to apply after 1844. A side note concerning the typological nature of Adventist theology. If the analogy that the heavenly sanctuary is identical to the earthly, as Adventism claims, Jesus could not in theory enter into the presence without entering the most holy place. In the earthly temple, the presence is only found behind the veil, or simply put, the most holy place, not in the first department of the tabernacle. Therefore, for Jesus to enter into the presence of God is to go behind the veil, in light of the tabernacle analogies used by Paul. This is in agreement with Paul's statement in chapter 9, verse 24, where he says Jesus entered not into the holy places made with hands, which are figures of the true, but into heaven itself, to appear in the presence of God for us. Also, Hebrews 9:8 says that while the first department is still standing, there is no access into the holiest of all. Jesus now gives us access to the holiest of all, Hebrews 6:19-20, which would mean that there is no first department standing after Jesus' completed work following the ascension. Of course, God is not confined to a room in a temple, which for the type-antitype for Adventists to work would logically follow. However, in light of the themes and analogy Paul lays out in Hebrews, Jesus entering the presence of God is entering into the most holy place, just as the Aaronic priests would enter the presence of God before the veil into the most holy place. If one were to deny the presence of God in the same sense as behind the veil is also present in the holy place, then the type-antitype breaks down, and the whole investigative judgment theory collapses. This is not the only place where a literal interpretation of typology would break down. Other places, such as Jesus being a high priest, but the Mosaic law requires a priest from the lineage of Aaron, Hebrews 7:12, the high priest on the Day of Atonement killing the Lord's goat, Leviticus 16:15, which would contradict creating Jesus the high priest killing Jesus the Lord's goat. The two goats in the Day of Atonement must be without blemish. Adventists believe that the scapegoat is Satan, so they would have to affirm that Satan is without blemish. The fact that the Lord's goat, as per Leviticus 16, does not actually bear the sins in the atonement, Jesus would not logically bear the sins. A literal interpretation of Leviticus 16's Day of Atonement and the sanctuary being exactly like the heavenly in the minds of Adventists sets out to prove too much, fatally collapsing their position due to a lack of coherency.